Okay, so introducing you to the session that we had with FLANZ by starting off letting you know about what FLANZ is. So FLANZ, short for Flexible Learning Association, have been around in New Zealand for quite a long time. And we're, as Kotoriako, we're members and have been had people involved in the exec for the last decade or so. So Lucie's currently an exec member on FLANZ, and previous to that I was, and Ricky Wally has been as well. So, they share a kaupapa with us, making our core accessible for all in the online flexible and distance learning space. The membership has been quite heavily tertiary focused, but I think in the last 10 years we've been bringing that schooling focus to it. And I think it's a really valuable connection for us to have that helps reach across the sector, because there's lots to learn from our tertiary colleagues.
And as an overview of what we're going to do today, these are 6 topics that we picked out from the recent conference that we're just going to go through. So some of the trends, challenges, one of the keynote presentations about pedagogy. It was an evolving technologies focus, something about the tech, and then some teacher perspectives, some engagement tools, and a bit more on that report. So the very first thing was an upcoming conference, and it had identified these themes that they thought were really global, long-lasting themes in flexible learning. And each of them can get unpacked further because, accessibility for me, I automatically started thinking about equity and the quality of learning there that was really recurrent in the conference that we were in. The indigeneity linking through to cultural responsiveness here in NZ. And of course, the open education resources were discussed. So when they're talking about openness, I think that's very much part of that particular narrative. And that identified these particular 4 challenges that they thought were coming up. And, this will be something that I think we'll get future opportunities to unpack a bit more as some of the factors behind, learner-centeredness. Why is that a challenge and how? And to me, it was quite interesting, the adjectives that they'd chosen in here, like deliberate equity. We know equity is important, so deliberate had a different, a more nuanced connotation to me, and the progressive innovation as well. It sort of raised more questions than it answered in some ways, which I think was their intent, because they were trying to encourage everyone to go to this conference, which is in Wellington next year, which is quite unusual for all you Wellington-based folks. And these were some of their observations right now. The point about sustainable funding was made by a number of presenters throughout this, unsurprisingly. And the notion of learning design was really interwoven throughout it as well. A lot of the people there were specialist learning designers, so that was what they did the entire time, and they worked in with the content specialists and didn't actually teach the courses. So this was very much the people that were focused on that kind of stuff. But there was a whole range. So I'm going to pause our recording here and just ask people, what do you think are some of the main challenges in online education? And invite participants watching this later to have a think about it, perhaps pause and think as well. Recording. Goodbye. This was a keynote speaker on the second day. He was Associate Professor Michael Cowling from Australian University of Queensland, I think. I've got the link in there in the notes. And he was making the point that, Australia, it wasn't just us that have banned cell phones, and that this was quite a global thing, which sparked my interest. And I actually went off and did a little bit of research on this. And it was quite interesting to see some papers suggesting that the evidence that then increased learning was inconclusive. And there was a lot of research and narrative that you needed to actually teach your students safe and responsible usage of it. So, and also they were talking about this trend starting to go back, so that places that had banned it were now opening it up again, some of the ones in Canada and stuff. So that was kind of interesting. What he talked about was the Gartner Hype Cycle. And his quote was, starting with the problem you wanted to solve and then thinking about technology. And apologies, this picture's kind of small, but it's just for all of the emerging technologies that they've put in 2021. And one that caught my eye here is in tiny letters, generative AI. And what they've coded it there at that stage is to say that in 2 to 3 years, they think that it's going to be getting to this plateau of productivity, which is kind of interesting because on the next slide, what he'd done with this later was mapped generative AI. And so this Gartner cycle, a hype cycle is a well-known thing. And he was suggesting that at the moment, it's been just down here in the trough of disillusionment. He was suggesting that this was where it was at the start of the year, and that now it was somewhere here. He reckoned it was on the slope of enlightenment heading back up. And I note that the word hopefully is in there. So it was kind of interesting just to note that, because we've heard a lot about AI and a lot of interest. So it was a different perspective with us. So in terms of time, he's suggesting that 24 is about where my arrow is here under the of. So starting to head up. So we shall see. So the next question here that I'm going to pause for in a moment is examples of tech you can think of how technology has been hyped. And if we had an educational hype cycle, what things can you think of that can be on it? And I know that you're going to have some. I've certainly got a few that are coming to my mind. So I'm going to pause the recording, just resuming recording. The next session that we went to was some people that were doing something that had been a trial that they wanted to share with us. And it was called extended reality, which is an umbrella term that encompasses virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality. And these particular people would, from a Japanese university, were doing frame learning languages. So it was a practice paper by a couple of professors there. And these were their key findings. They said they'd had significant language gains and that the students were enthusiastic about it, but that they had had a few difficulties adapting to the platform and technical issues. This is an example of the rubric that they were using. So they had a screen where people were going in, and so just like in something like Minecraft or whatever, they were little digitized images of the person. They were going in there, they were walking around, finding a buddy, having a conversation, and that conversation was being recorded, and then people were going through and analysing it for factors such as this and assigning it a numeric value. And they were using that to then target the next learning steps for that individual, so that it was individual learning. So my summary of the discussion at the end in terms of a PMI was they thought it was overall a worthwhile tool and that it gamified the learning, but they did note the negative that some of the students had got cyber sickness from being in the VR environment, which I was really sympathetic to. They said that the instructions were vital, and they found that it was really important to give those instructions for people in their first language, not to try and do immersion with it and everything. And they also found that what they needed to do was flip the learning structure a lot. So they tended to give out a lot of the sort of content ahead of time so that people would look at it and then use the actual session times, the synchronous session times, for the interactive conversations. So it sounded like quite a busy thing. I looked up to see if I could find us a paper in Google Scholar, but it's such a new practice innovation that they haven't published on it yet. So keep an eye out if you're interested, and they'll probably publish. And also there'll be a paper coming out from the conference. There'll be a practice paper with more details and more references if you're particularly interested in it. But there wasn't a lot else available just yet.
You can actually access the frame environment, and I'll pop the link in if everybody wants to go and have
Thank you. I saw something that offered you a trial, but I wasn't sure again how much it cost. So cool. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah, it reminds me of the old Second Life, if anybody ever played in Second Life over a decade ago, of virtual spaces.
Yeah. Okay. We'll add that into the preso later, hey, too. Yeah. Okie doke. So the next question we had was your experience, if any, with these type of technologies, and if you think they might be useful in your teaching. Just going to pause our.
Okay, so I'm just going to share a couple of things that I found interesting and resonated with me. It was quite sort of very academic, the FLANZ stuff, and also quite tertiary focused. But I liked this one that John did from the medical school at Auckland University, because it's what we do. And so I was making comparisons of what he had to share about peer review. He tagged on in the pandemic world because at the universities, and maybe they were suffering a lot from student satisfaction feedback and really wanting to get to the heart of what their teaching and learning looked like, rather than just relying on the student surveys that were coming in to tell them if the program was any good. So they have been implementing the peer review process, and really it's very much like, can you flick over to the next one, Lucy? Very much like the professional growth cycle that we have for our primary teachers. Things like, the specifics are different, but mainly things like, you have your pre-observation, you're looking at both synchronous and asynchronous, observing and giving feedback on design and teaching strategies, and just that opportunity for reflection and professional conversations with a peer. So I just wanted to note that, within a different part of the sector, those higher level things around professional learning and support are just important in our online spaces. And another thing I picked out of this, next one, the teacher's perspective and inventory. Now, this piqued my interest as well. I was thinking, oh, what's that? It's the thing that they use. So I went away and found out more about the teacher perspectives and inventory. And for many reasons, I thought it would be a really useful reflective tool to think about your teaching practice. They suggested that you could use it for a whole range of other things, or even just to have professional conversations about what comes up in your teaching perspectives inventory. So, next one, Lucy. So basically, it's like a psychometric tool that asks a whole lot of questions around teaching practice. And the questions are organised around what you believe about teaching and learning, what you intend to do when you're going about your teaching, and what you actually do when you're going about your teaching. Because sometimes they can be different sort of things. And it looked at across it on a domain of types, I guess, types of teaching, where for example, transmission, looking at the content or getting across content and subject matter, and about being an expert in your field. Apprenticeship was more around looking at, authenticity, relevance, the ZPD, proximal development. And then another one about conducting your teaching from a learner's point of view. So, well, you can read through them. I've put them all up there. So I looked at these range of, for some it might be actually pedagogies of practice that teachers are built up over years, or it may be what's been identified by the researchers as good practice. So this goes back to, I'm not sure if there's you should be able to, if you actually Google some scholarly articles, it actually writes about this, and it's been around for some time. So I challenged myself, and it was really interesting to look at what my TPI said about me. We're in the transmissive section about, transmitting content. I found that my beliefs were very strong about not doing it. They didn't quite match up with what I said I did do. So it was one area where I had quite a discrepancy around my beliefs, intentions, and actions. So there's things you can pull out of this bigger view of your own teaching practice and reflect on. So I'll just leave that there with you as something you may be interested in looking up, and reflecting on questions and unpacking what you might see in your resulting profile. So discussion question here is there any time can you share a time of that peer review or self-reflection has helped you grow as a teacher? And actually, this is really timely, Olivia. You want to start on this one because I heard from you today.
That?
Yeah, that's a good segue, actually, because this is relevant to, tapping into how our students are. And I really enjoyed this presentation from Lynette at the Open Polytech. It was very, very quantitative research data that she was presenting. But at the heart of it, it was checking in about how are you feeling? And so they have, at the Open Poly, everything works through their LMS called iQualify, I think, and they've developed a new learner analytic feature called Pulse, and it's used as a way to gauge how the learners are feeling about their study and the materials they are learning from. And there's 3 types of formats: text response, word clouds, spatial response, I'm not sure what that is, and a multi-choice quiz. But so basically they launched this several times during a program at key times to check in with the learners. It was anonymized, so they found that challenging not being able to see, where they could target support, but they found it really useful to give an indication of overall how things were going on their program and how they could set up changes. So it was basically a checking in, how are you? And you could see from that, from that slide there, the sorts of answers they were getting back and categorized either sort of negative or positive. So next one, Lucie. So for me, as an e-teacher, working with e-teachers, it meant to me about how important it was to focus on learner well-being. This goes back to Maslow's hierarchy about being all right before you're able to do that higher level stuff, how we can build in checkpoints for this during our programs, and how we really need to be being adaptive in our learning design as we go through. We've got some diverse learners out there, different things happening for them, different capabilities and stuff that we don't really even know about. So for me, I thought that was an eye-opener about taking the pulse, seeing how everybody is. So here's a question for you, our e-teachers. How do you take the pulse with your online learners? So I couldn't not talk about this. Derek presented during the conference. I know that we've heard from them on the Tuitui Hōna Tangata research, which is quite quantitative data about what the scope of online learning is in New Zealand, and we're reasonably aware of this. But alongside that sits a parallel study that both Michael and Derek have been working on around more details on this. Did you want to go to the next slide? Yeah, Lucie. So when Michael was going around New Zealand, he had lots of interviews with lots of different people about a sustainable online distance learning for New Zealand schools, and started thinking about what this ecosystem for schools in New Zealand would be like. So although they haven't analysed all their data or written the final report, they had this to share at FLANZ. So they felt that a future ecosystem for distance learning in New Zealand schools would have many providers and achieve scale and sustainability. And then they went on to talk about the challenges of that. So next slide, Lucie. Yeah. Before the challenges, some of the things that came up in the design of that educational ecosystem was, I know I've just picked up key points, and I've got a link for you, I think on the earlier slide, where you can go to the details that are unpacked out of this. In fact, we could ask Derek to come and unpack it himself when he's finished his actual report. But the important things in the design of this online learning and across all New Zealand schools is students having agency and choice, that it's equitable, inclusive, is cohesive and coordinated. Look, we've been working on these things over many years, and innovative. So I think a lot of that stuff's already there. It's just not been adopted in the system-wide approach. Right. Next one, Lucy. And these are the key things, and these present as challenges, really. I actually do think we've got leadership and local policy, but we don't have government policy. Resourcing and funding, infrastructure and systems, not too bad. We're getting there with infrastructure and systems. The teacher role, this is what we're working on now. And accreditation, I think that was looking more into recognition of e-teachers, professionally, of which I think we've also done quite a bit of work in the Ko sector about teacher professionalism and being accredited with the Teaching Council and all the processes that we have. So I think there's a lot of stuff happening around this already, but there's a lot more joined up stuff that needs to happen, a lot more national support around it. There's loads of grassroots stuff that we're already doing. Moving on, Lucy, last one. So I've just picked out one of the challenges, of which with those previous slides, they were all unpacked, and just thinking about what this looks like for teachers. The pedagogical shift, again, those are the things that we're working on, but for all teachers, it's not the same. There's many teachers who have really no idea about the pedagogical space that we're in the online, flexible, hybrid learning that's going on. Lucy and I have been wondering what's happening with teacher education, and FLANZ was a good opportunity to reach out to some ITEs and look at what's happening with initial teacher education around online learning, or even just the knowledge of educational technology and its use. Online professional development, valuation happening. I feel really proud of what Kulturi is doing in that area. Employment structures, and that's one we have been working on and have taken to the ministry on many times about how to access FTE, how to access staffing, so that the teachers who are online teachers actually are not disadvantaged compared to teachers who are working in face-to-face schools. It's a little bit challenging because there's not a lot of us at the moment, and so we're very easy to ignore. And there's some recommendations from Derek there about developing standardised programs. Your thoughts, I guess, what's on the discussion? Yeah, so what's an ideal ecosystem like? What needs to change? I actually think this probably needs to be some acknowledgement of what we're actually already doing really well and could be scaled and be more sustainable. But
I'll just pause our recording.
Okay, so thanks. Some really good discussion. Looking forward to seeing if our AI meeting summary comes back, and then we might have some succinct notes that might support people to follow along if they're interested in looking at the recording. But otherwise, over to you, Lucy. We'll send out the slides as well because there's lots of links in them.
Yep, ka kite, this is the end of the recording. And as you can hear, we're going to follow up with that stuff, and we encourage you to go up and look at the resources as well.